Okay, guys. We are live for a audio test because
Nice.
we at Thetawave love our audio tests.
We love the audio tests.
It's very important to us that we have pristine, ooh la la
That's for sure.
levels of quality.
I mean, soon we'll just. I mean, right now, if we optimize it, dude, that sounds so much better even than last time. All right, let's try to talk like loud. Okay, so testing. I might. It's possible. Yeah. At some point, I'll probably talk like this.
Angry at you.
Yeah.
And
I've
might
heard-
start shouting.
I've heard these levels before on our podcast.
Man, when we get excited.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is going to be an exciting one.
It is because we are talking about the beep and the beep.
Redacted.
I'm just kidding. It's oh my gosh. Did my mic cut out?
Or is it just because I was shouting way over it?
I don't know.
Because that sounds
Yeah,
really
that-
good. It's like, maybe talk for an extended period of time to see if I'm very
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay. So, one of the things that we are going to be talking about today, as you can tell by the title, is the hypothalamus. Going to be presented over here by Jacob, and the LSTM cells going to be presented by me. Now, these are very fascinating topics because the hypothalamus is so small, and yet it controls so much about who we like, or basically are what allows us to be human and to have a lot of the cognitive processes that we do. Um,
Sounds so good. Make sure not to shout.
Hey guys, we will be right back here. I'm going
Right
to switch us here in just a second, and then we're going to prepare just a tad bit, and we'll be back in like 5 minutes or so. So,
Oh, yeah.
thank you for bearing with us, and we will see you then.
Peace.
All right, guys, we're back for a brief second. I just realized that the only way for me to adjust this thing is live. So, give us 1 second here.
Uno momento.
Figured out the problem.
Only a pretty fast fix, faster than a lot of the other ones. Getting quicker. Should I check out?
First, let's talk at a normal level to make sure
Okay. Everything's good.
because I changed
Alright.
the release for both of ours to fast. So
Makes
hopefully
sense.
that will help that. And then let's have you speak in
Okay.
a little bit of a
little bit of
angry volume.
angry.
Yeah.
Hey, why are you fixing the
stop
microphone
shouting,
problems?
Please stop.
Listen, you're not supposed to fix
shouting.
anything.
Stop.
You're supposed to make sure that it doesn't work. That's your job. You're not supposed to be helpful.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Let's turn it up and see.
Hey, why are you fixing the microphone problems? Listen, you're not supposed to fix anything. You're supposed to make sure that it doesn't work. That's your job. You're not supposed to be helpful.
We're getting some crossover, but it's not too much.
And that's not how we're going to be talking,
Right.
anyways. Hmm. Angry. Yeah. Hey, why are you fixing the microphone problems? Listen, you're not supposed to fix anything. You're supposed to make sure that it doesn't work. That's your job. You're not supposed to be helpful.
I think I might change. I don't know. Maybe do I change it back and just, or do I leave it at that setting? What do you think?
I don't. It might be safer to change it back
Yeah.
and just be careful, just so we know that it'll be fine through the whole thing. Just be mindful of our levels. But
Yeah.
really when it's really loud and condensed sounds. And also when I'm like here shouting, just letting all the reverberations happen. It has to clean all of that up. And so
Less likely for that to be triggered.
Sweet.
That's later on in the chain. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
test.
Okay. Test, 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 test. Test. 1, 2, 3.
Test. Testing. Test, 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 test.
Test, test, test. Now Jacob is going to shout.
Okay. I'm shouting.
He's shouting.
I'm shouting.
shouting.
Right at the microphone.
He's being loud.
I'm shouting. I'm shouting. Right at the microphone.
This sounds a lot better. Okay. That's pretty solid.
Yeah, I think so.
Sick. All right. What's nice is that even with all three cameras running, it's all working smoothly.
Indeed.
I am gonna
Hey everyone, and welcome to Thetawave.
Mm.
I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Reed. I am a neuroscience researcher as well as a machine learning engineer and a musician and songwriter and singer.
Mm.
And I'm here with Jacob Holland, my co-host, who's also a neuroscience researcher. And Jacob, what have we got going on today?
All right, so we've got two very interesting topics that I'm pretty excited to dive into. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the hypothalamus, okay? This is a very vital structure that, if you understand, can really help in your optimization of anything ranging from regulating stress, better sleeping, health, overall in general, understanding the baseline model of how you're structured. All of that can kind of be put into context of your hypothalamus. And so we're going to be talking a little bit how to do that and the supplements, the correct nutrients that is needed for that, and some lifestyle factors, just so you can kind of do that. And then we're going to be going into something a little bit interesting for our machine learning topic, which is LSTM cells. And Ryan, he's cooked up something real good for that. So I'm pretty excited. He has a whole presentation to show.
We've got some exciting visuals for you on that. And the reason I wanted to spend a little more time on that, preparing that topic, was that they're one of those topics that gets a little bit technical and gets a little bit hard to understand once you delve into kind of their inner workings. I wouldn't say they're quite as hard to understand as maybe self-attention mechanisms on a low level, but they're pretty close. And so in order to know kind of where everything's going and what's happening, we've got some visuals for that. So
Nice. That's pretty exciting. All right, I'm definitely really excited because LSTM cells is definitely something I don't understand. And so visuals are going to be very helpful. And you're already a great teacher, so it's going to be pretty fun. And we're using a new streaming service or software, sorry. And it has done wonders for our audio.
That and the chain setup, it allowed for us to spend a little bit more computational resources on our effects chain, allowing us to control the sound a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then I spent a little bit more time on kind of refining that process to make sure that, things were optimal.
Yeah.
So that's why we have such great sound right now.
Exactly. And so this, if you're watching this on Spotify or Apple Music, this might be our first episode on that. And so if you want to get the LSTM cell visuals, head over to Thetawave on YouTube for that. And if you're already here to join us, that's great too.
And eventually, I think it would be cool to have to set up a website with these resources that people can go, because there's a lot of papers that we put together and we mentioned that have a lot more information about this stuff that I feel like people might be interested in seeing, as well as these visuals they might be interested in playing around with. And so if we could, set up a website that that had all that stuff that we could let them browse, that might be nice.
Because this is obviously for quote unquote entertainment purposes, but also it's a place for people to learn. And so eventually,
technically, a category
is education or science and technology
is our YouTube category, but I'd say we fall probably more under the education part of it.
I would say so. Especially like tropics, machine learning. I mean, all of that. I really want to get that website going. I think that'd be really awesome. Yeah. Kind of start our own little community there. Yeah. Because I think
have a community first, maybe.
We'll get there. That's for sure. I mean, I'm about to start going ham on the advertising side. That's for sure.
Well, with this percent of quality, how can you not?
Dude, seriously, it's like, I've been hesitant because of, it's like I really want that nice, good quality. I want the time to be able to edit all of the videos and put them out there. And now that seems to be more available. Yeah. And so time to rock and roll.
Hell yeah.
And it's time to rock and roll with the hypothalamus.
Yes, folks, we have the hypothalamus entering the stage tonight.
Boom, boom. And you look, see him walking into the stadium. And
He may not look like much. He may be small, but he packs a punch.
it's like those like 5'4", really stocky guys you see at the gym, where it's like, wow, they're really small, but they're also ginormous. And it's like, doesn't really make any sense, but you just know they're powerful. They're strong. They're real strong. I want everyone to kind of look at their pinky real quick.
We'd also like to point out for anybody that has ever wondered about that, how such small, how smaller people can seem to be able to keep up with people that have a lot more capacity for muscle. You know, there a factor that often gets overlooked there is the range of motion and the actual physics of leverage and pulling things off the ground and whatnot. For instance, when you're doing a deadlift, a shorter person has a much smaller axis there. And so they are going to have a lot easier time. It's as if you were, it's because the more weight you have, when you put weight on the farther end of a lever, like the farther down the lever you end up putting it, the more pressure it applies to the lever. And so taller people are going to have more pressure being applied in the eccentric portion of that.
And it's just, more body mass that they're going to have to cover muscles in. And so they're going to look, a little bit skinnier. But that's fine. We love our tall kings. We love our short kings. We love all of them. They're great.
What is that? What are you doing? Kings?
Yes, queen.
Yes,
Okay.
queen.
Anyways, about the hypothalamus. Okay, sorry, I'm just in touch with my feminine side, but I want everyone to look.
Wrong with that. You don't need to apologize.
I want everyone to look at their pinky.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I got something in my eye here, so I'm flipping Ryan off. So if you look at your pinky, you look at the fingernail. This is about the size of your hypothalamus.
Not the pinky, but the fingernail.
The fingernail is the size of the hypothalamus. It weighs around 4 grams, and if you're American, you can use that as reference for like a nickel. It weighs a little bit less than just a nickel right there. It's very small, but it's very mighty. It's a part of the diencephalon, which is a gray matter group that is composed of, I think it's all thalamus in it. We have the normal thalamus, the integration center of the brain. We have the epithalamus, the subthalamus, and the hypothalamus, which is what we're going to be talking about today, which is we can think of the thalamus as the brain's coordinator. But what is it coordinating? It's coordinating the information that is being stored from the rest of the body. It's integrating sensory information, right? It's integrating of our awareness of states. And where do those states actually come from? Those states, you could say, are regulated and even start the production of bodily functions in the hypothalamus. What's really interesting about the body's health is that a lot of it can be traced back to simply the central nervous system. A lot of dysfunction, a lot of deregulations, a lot of chronic illnesses can be fixed with central nervous system optimization. And the majority of that optimization actually comes from your hypothalamus. And there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. There are 3 big factors that come into play here. One is your endocrine system. And your endocrine system is kind of the hormone messenger function of the body, where it has these feedback loops that send different signals to, regulate hunger, to regulate sleep, to regulate heat versus cold, and as well as the production of different hormones that respond to your environment, and you need certain types of environmental stimulation to start kind of this hormone production. And all of that is regulated by the hypothalamus. So that's the big one, the endocrine system, your hormones.
Mm.
Pretty big thing there. The second is autonomic functions. Okay. So the hormones, they're kind of like the backbone, right? They actually start the production of these functions. But you're not exactly aware of them. You're aware of the feelings they produce. You know if everything's going good because I'm feeling well rested. I'm feeling focused. All of that is autonomic. And these autonomic functions are the second big factor to where it is, for the most part, unconscious. And so oftentimes there are kind of these, it's very interesting because a lot of the times there's this disconnect between your cortex and your hypothalamic urges to do things. And so oftentimes we'll do things that we're not necessarily sure why we're doing them from a logical perspective. And that's because we're actually being willed by the connections between the mesolimbic pathway, the nucleus accumbens, and the basal ganglia, all to start you to propagate towards doing specific things, like maybe go just, they're going to put more value on, let's say, getting water, or to quench your thirst or to quench your hunger, different things of that nature, without necessarily coordinating with your more executive functions in the neocortex. So that's also something really interesting. And then we have, so for the third big one, we have hormones, the endocrine system, we have autonomic functions, and then we have the limbic system. It is a big player when it comes to regulating limbic systems. It's very interesting. I heard this one guy talk about the relationship between the cortex and the limbic system, and talking about which one kind of serves the other. The cortex serves the more primordial states, which are the limbic system. This is from an evolutionary perspective. What developed first? It's kind of who we are. Then the emotions behind our actions. The will behind it, if you will, even if it's not free. That will, baseline will that comes there, the coding behind that. The hypothalamus makes sure that that the limbic system gets what it needs. And it will override any executive functions that might try to stop you from getting that. And this is actually a really interesting mechanism when it comes to sexual behaviors, right? Sometimes we do things that, when it comes to sexual gratification, that really is, that maybe, like when it comes to maybe like cheating on a spouse, for example, that is actually regulated by the hypothalamus, even if you know that from an executive perspective, over a long-term period, this is going to have disastrous effects on you. In that moment, your hypothalamic urges can take over and control your executive functions.
And to be clear, that means that it is possible for the hypothalamus to take over your executive functions.
But
it does not mean that it is going to take over your executive functions. If it does, it just means that your executive functions are not strong enough. Like you're more in a more primal state, like, or your brain is more primal than, say, a brain that can that can actually control that.
And if you're in control, this won't happen because there's the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus that helps regulate these processes, right? And so that's going to be a major player here. So you can't just blame cheating on your wife
on your hypothalamus,
because that
doesn't work that way.
That's not how it works. But it gives you,
my hypothalamus told me to. I didn't want to say no.
You are the hypothalamus. But anyways, I got a little bit of off track.
Yeah, just to kind of, if this is a good time, like, is this a good kind of intersection point between points that we've got to?
Yeah.
It-
So pretty much what I was
Um,
saying is just the three major big players here: autonomic, limbic, and endocrine. Yes.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
wanted to take a step back for a second and kind of look at the hypothalamus from a
Yeah.
more like uh, maybe practical day to day like
Practical.
perspective. Because like the hypothalamus really, at least from my uh, understanding of it, works a lot like a computer's BIOS
Mm.
system. Now, the BIOS is very, very small. It's a very small program, and it's built in. It's embedded into like the motherboard. You can update it. It's very kind of a difficult process because uh, it has to happen from within the BIOS.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
um, and but this program is very important because it basically controls both the electrical currents that go to different components in the motherboard, so the
Mm-hmm.
amount of power they can get, as well as fans for temperature. It
Yeah.
controls the temperature of the motherboard and the components. It measures the temperature of the components,
Yeah.
and it controls a lot of those important base elements for computer
Mm-hmm.
function that happen below the
Yeah.
surface of the
Yeah.
operating system. And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, it seems to function a whole lot like our own, almost like a biological BIOS
Mm-hmm.
system.
Yeah.
And I can
Definitely.
imagine that being kind of messed up or having issues, bugs, whatever, could have a lot of outcropping, downstream.
Oh
Um,
yes. Absolutely.
as kind of an example of that, it just in my realm with computers, like in the BIOS example, my computer has pretty fairly new components, and I built it myself. But the BIOS system, um, I recently had to update my BIOS, which I don't normally do. I just leave it kind of, but I had to update my BIOS because I was running into a problem that I wasn't sure. I couldn't figure out
Couldn't
the
figure it
cause.
out.
Like it was nothing in the operating system that I could tell that was causing it. And it was that my Ethernet network adapters were getting disconnected when my computer started
Oh.
working really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I checked like the adapter settings. I checked everything I could think of to try and figure out what was the cause of that. Couldn't figure it out. Finally, I decided, fine, I'll update my BIOS and just see if it works.
See it.
And
Yeah.
went and downloaded the new version of the BIOS,
Mm-hmm.
and it was quite a bit out of date, several years. But updated my BIOS, and then boom,
Yeah.
problem went away.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's very much like our hypothalamus. If it's been a long time since it's been updated, a lot of things start to be dysfunctional, and you can even see that. Like you talked about temperature. If it gets too hot, it's over processed, and it's dealing with a lot of things. This can cause some inflammation, if you will, within the BIOS or within the hypothalamus. Let's use that language. So, I mean, if we can talk about temperature regulation, we can talk about that kind of first in the hypothalamus. It's actually a really cool mechanism. There's actually a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of health benefits by understanding the ways to optimize the system.
So, real fast, can we think of
Yeah.
inflammation, the effect of inflammation kind of in the brain, kind of as like, bringing it back to our motherboard analogy, the effect of heat over time on components within the motherboard, as in if it happens occasionally and it goes away, that's fine. Like, but if it remains and it happens over a long period of time, it can eventually start degrading the components and the performance of like the different components.
Well, yeah, that's definitely very interesting. You can think of it almost as friction with your normal brain functions and your immune responses, And if there are problems within this very finely tuned mechanisms, maybe by, let's say, I think actually we should start with the arcuate nucleus. We can do the thermal like regulation later because this pertains to this. You have neurons that kind of stimulate appetite, stimulate suppressing appetite when you're full, and this kind of integrates signals from leptin, which gets released from fat cells that pretty much says we're full, we're good, we don't need to go anymore. Okay, and then also ghrelin from your stomach that says, hey, we're hungry, we need food, and then also like insulin that reports on like your glucose levels. And if you take something like processed food, for example, that if when you eat it over a very long period of time, this sends very intense spikes through the MPY and AGRP receptors that are mediating your hunger. And so what happens is that through this pathway, your leptin, which is your fat cells that says, hey, we're full, that starts to get desensitized because it's happening so much. And then you have this dysfunction that starts to happen here, this miscommunication here. And when that happens, the excess glucose spikes that messes up this very finely tuned mechanism between ghrelin, insulin, and glucose and leptin starts to cause hypothalamic inflation because of the continual response, the overprocessing of all of this. And then it starts to, instead of being very finely tuned for understanding this, it suppresses the sensitivity so that it doesn't get completely destroyed in this kind of friction between these processes and these heightened responses over and over and over and over again, which is why which is really interesting, which is why time restricted eating is actually a huge factor here when it comes to reducing hypothalamic inflation. Sorry, I keep saying inflation. I mean inflammation. Hypothalamic inflammation. Because
I'm just picturing the hypothalamus like
just
blowing up
inflating.
like a balloon.
I mean, you can kind of think of it like that in a way.
It gets inflamed.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does.
Mhm. But with the inflammation, time restricted eating has the best evidence to back it when it comes to reducing the inflammation caused by glucose spikes through processed foods and like high sugar, by giving your receptors time to repair themselves before they have to do these finely tuned processes again and receive all of the signals necessary for regulating this digestive food appetite kind of response, which is kind of cool. So, and then you can kind of think of that as if you keep overloading it, it's going to keep heating up and heating up and heating up until it kind of stops working. And this kind of inflammatory process, what's interesting is that once you build up a resistance to leptin after these glucose spikes, leptin stops telling your hypothalamus to stop eating, to where you pretty much now, no matter how much you eat, you are continuously hungry. And you keep eating and you keep eating and you keep eating. And this becomes a regular norm for a lot of people. And this is why there are sometimes these urges to continue to eat even after you've eaten so much, because it stops becoming about maintaining energy balance and homeostasis and more so about satisfying the conditions necessary for leptin to finally signal into the brain. It just continuously needs more and more and more. And then what's also interesting is that it starts to overlap into the dopaminergic system, to where now instead of eating for just to suppress appetite and to have energy balance, it starts to translate over to reward instead completely. And so now you're getting this dopaminergic response to food mixed in with the resistance to leptin signaling, then affects your insulin resistance. And that's how usually type 2 diabetes starts to develop.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I personally hate eating most of the time. I eat because I have to, and because if I don't, I'm not in my optimal state, in which case I can't like count on functioning as well as I could have otherwise. And so I almost, in a weird way, have a similar issue, but fueled differently, in that if I start feeling myself start getting to my non-optimal state, like I'm going to be hungry soon, a lot of times I'll just want to go ahead and take care of the problem and
Yeah,
eat
yeah.
anyway, so that
Mm-hmm.
um I don't reach a point where my performance starts degrading because of it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I'll probably eat more frequently because of that. Like because
Mm-hmm.
of the fact that not because I enjoy it,
Yeah.
but because I don't enjoy being hungry.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And I mean, and the arcuate nucleus actually can detect your glucose levels. And so it's sending kind of these signals and is in kind of direct correlation with ghrelin, which is the hormone released by your stomach that says you're hungry. And the arcuate nucleus also detects the glucose levels. That is then going to let the rest of the brain know that, hey, you're not going to have enough nutrients to run. You're not going to have enough glucose. You're not going to have enough nutrients in order to have all the proper functions. So you better go get some food right now, or we're going to shut down to conserve energy because survival is needed. So that's probably something. But I'm also sure because you're just eating food, getting it over with to continue with your optimal state, that type of eating, no matter what your diet is, actually improves leptin resistance. And this time restricted eating, yeah, can actually increase leptin sensitivity of up to 64%. And so this kind of means that when you're full, you're going to know you're full and a lot quicker than the majority of people, which is pretty cool. And it's even better to have like an 8 to 10 hour window where you have like 2 to 3 meals at a specific time each day. Because what's also interesting, and this kind of gets into like the circadian rhythm, circadian clock, and those genes.
I don't have a circadian rhythm. I wasn't born with that.
You don't? I mean, it's yours has adapted to such a large degree to your own sleep wake cycle.
Yeah,
That's
it just
for
like
sure.
goes with the flow, like whatever it
Mhm.
is that I'm on. Except it doesn't like waking up in the morning, like early
Yeah.
in the morning. It does not like that. Like if I wake up before 12, pretty much before 12, like no, probably before 11. If I wake up
Yeah.
before 10 or 11,
Yeah.
my body is like, bro, seriously, like
No, yeah,
like
for
we have
sure.
so much day left before we get to night.
Yeah, that's so fair. Yeah. What was it on Saturday morning or Saturday at like 12 when I went to go like get my stuff from here and I like banged on the door and I saw you walking out just like, here, take it. I'm going back to bed.
Yes. No, you don't want to wake me up and talk to me in the morning.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, I mean, from like just a physiological perspective, I don't want to wake you up, just because you need to be in that rest state. And this resting state is regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus is really awesome. It's got
The super charismatic nucleus.
super charismatic. Yes.
It's got a lot of personality and influence.
Super, but that is not what it's called. Super chiasmatic nucleus. Yes. And it's definitely a interesting, um, very interesting area. And it's kind of the master biological clock. And so what's also cool is that there's actually a lot of genetic factors that come into this. And you can even see when you stimulate certain stem cells to be like um, suprachiasmatic neurons, kind of give it that genetic information, it starts to have this 24-hour cycle without it really knowing why. And so it kind of keeps the body on this 24-hour night and day cycle that can change to some degree, but the majority of it is you really want, because in the sun gives blue light. And blue light is what mainly stimulates orexin to then start that get rid of sleepiness and start this wakefulness, kind of more attention driven like experience. And so this is what blue light does. And so oftentimes when we have blue light, before we go to bed, it stops us from going to bed. Why? Because there are these cells. They're called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. And these are particularly responsive to blue light. And once they receive blue light, what happens is they produce this molecule called melanopsin. And this melanopsin travels to suprachiasmatic nucleus to tell it to produce orexin to stay awake. And so if you need to work late or really early, depending on your sleep schedule, and need to go to bed soon, even if you're really tired a second ago, the second you turn on the computer, you start looking at that blue light for a while, that sleepiness is going to go away.
That assumes that you allow your computer to produce blue light. Us programmers, we don't allow our computers to produce blue light. We have everything in black.
Really?
No, the majority of programmers like work in dark modes. And
that
it's actually
turns off blue light?
Well, yeah, it's because when your screen is black, when the pixels are black, that means they're not emitting light. And so the darker that they are,
less blue light.
then and the warmer that they are.
Mhm.
But I usually keep mine in neutrals. But the darker that they are, then that means the less blue light that they're actually emitting. And
That's
so
good.
we have like our interfaces in dark and our fonts in grays. And it really reduces the strain like on our eyes from looking at the computers. And also
for sure.
kind of as a result over time it can make, at least for me, because I work a lot at night, it makes me more sensitive to a lot of daytime light.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But that is an option for people that do have to work closer to bedtime, like you can use darker interfaces for that. And if you have an optimum, I know like some people like my mom don't like dark interfaces because they have a hard time reading them because of the similarity of colors and the lack of light. But if you get one that's well designed, like if you're working within a dark interface that's well designed, has the colors kind of optimally contrasted with each other, then it's actually a lot easier to read.
Yeah. And honestly, that's just kind of setting up your computer that way is honestly in a long-term sense easier than kind of getting blue light glasses, because you actually just optimize your screen for reducing blue light instead. And maybe, like let's say, you're not going to really be outside at all today. You kind of do want that blue light whenever you wake up, because then it stimulates that wakefulness promotion.
True. Maybe I need to give myself more blue light earlier.
Yeah. Whenever I'm feeling tired and I know I need to sleep, I'll just turn my brightness all the way up and just stare at my phone. And when I do that orexin gets produced, and it's like, wow, I feel so awake. But it disrupts my circadian rhythm. And so that's also a problem. So it's that this is, what you'll notice is that since, we talked about it's about the size of the nail of your pinky. This is a very small region of the brain. And so it needs to be incredibly sophisticatedly fine-tuned. And so disruptions to this cycle, especially the suprachiasmatic one. Yeah.
Ask/insert something. Maybe better than fine-tuned, like, would it be more appropriate to say it needs to be its configuration is important, and thus it's important that it not be subject to a lot of change.
Yes.
Okay.
Because when you think about it, the majority of our brain processing power is unconscious. It's autonomic. And hormones control everything from when you were a baby and growing up, kind of that growth hormone. It's absolutely necessary, that's produced by the anterior pituitary and mammillary bodies.
You don't want wild fluctuations in those control
mechanisms. And my point about it being kind of small and finely tuned, even if that's not the best way to say it, is that often disruptions to the hypothalamus causing that inflammation can have a cascading effects on the other nuclei within it.
Right. And I think my main reason wanting to clarify there was because the fine tuning usually has the implication and meaning of intentional changes to make better, and it's seem like what you were trying to get at.
Oh,
there. It
yeah,
seemed like
yeah.
more like you were saying it shouldn't be subject to a lot of change
Yes.
in its base
Mhm.
system. You know.
And this is because it's constantly fighting against change. And so it's constantly trying to vie for optimization and energy balance and homeostasis. And so the less we put it into overdrive, cause this heating.
It almost has like certain parameters
Mhm.
within it that it knows it needs to achieve,
Yes.
and it's like a mini system designed to basically toggle things to various extents in order to try and achieve those parameters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and it's even if things are super out of whack, what's great is that it still knows the optimal states that are needed for you. And so no matter how far gone you are, unless you have like narcolepsy or genetic disruption.
Even if it can't modify
Mhm.
this function over here, it's going to
Yeah.
try and figure out a way to do it.
Exactly. And so this negative cascade effect can also be flipped into where if you optimize certain systems within the hypothalamus, other systems start to optimize with it because it's all in conjunction in this homeostasis energy balance process. Hormonal balance as well is thrown in there. And one more thing I kind of want to talk about is that stress is also a big
Mhm.
factor when it comes to the hypothalamus, and this is regulated by the HPA axis. And so the HPA axis is interesting because it's your hypothalamus, and if you want the technical uh, area, the kind of cluster of cells, the nuclei, it's the paraventricular nucleus that then connects to your pituitary gland that releases corticotropin releasing hormones. And these corticotropin releasing hormones start to release down to your adrenal glands. And these adrenal glands start to release cortisol.
It's all about the cortisol.
It's all about that
It's
cortisol.
stress.
And this is actually kind of where this kind of limbic component kind of comes in, you know. And what's interesting about the hypothalamus is that it connects to everything. So you could literally talk about it forever. It's quite the deep dive, if you will. And honestly, I kind of feel prepared for it. But I'm having a really fun time. I love the hypothalamus. But
The difficulty with condensing the hypothalamus
oh
is
my
that
gosh,
it branches into so many different
so
areas
many
and
things affects so
connects to
many.
so many different things, and so
Yeah.
many different things connect to it. So
Mhm.
it's hard to like. It's really hard to kind of necessarily segment those,
Yeah.
those things out from each
Mhm.
other.
Yeah, for sure.
But important takeaways I feel like from that are the kind of the elements to really keep in mind is that your hypothalamus is a central processing system that controls everything from your base temperatures to some of your nervous responses,
Mhm.
as well as um, your um, your hormone
Yeah,
levels,
hormone,
and
digestion.
yeah, and
Eat.
if it seems like you're dealing with maybe an issue that is like that issue that I have had with my system where you just can't find the cause,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't seem to really be something in the higher level
Mhm.
systems. You've tried a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
Like maybe think about it, in terms of, okay, well, what could the base cause, maybe even stemming from the hypothalamus,
Yeah.
in these regulations that are
Mhm.
happening. What am I seeing evidence of that, of potential
Yeah.
dysregulation or something like that? And what kind of, do you know any specific conditions that can arise from dysregulations of hypothalamus, just as
Well,
examples?
one of the biggest, kind of the biggest two that are seen. Well, actually, the biggest one is insomnia,
Mm.
generally speaking, from a physiological
So
standpoint.
my hypothalamus is really screwed.
Potentially. And that just could be because just biologically we're optimized for staying up in the day and then sleeping at night. And you've kind of switched that around, though that
Maybe my networks woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
potentially, you know. And so they're trying to figure things out, and still maintain that balance. And since it's kind of different than what it was genetically programmed to do, it might have some trouble doing that, but we'll figure out a way to do that,
Actually, that there have been studies that have shown that your natural um, relative circadian rhythm, so the time of day that you naturally gravitate towards starting your day at
Mhm.
and ending at, that component is something that is defined genetically, and it is something that is going to be different amongst people.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
like
for sure.
people will have different genetics, like kind of
hmm
starting points for
Yeah, I mean, early risers versus night owls, and obviously some differentiation there.
right, and
Yeah.
that trait, that night owl versus early
Mhm.
that is a genetic.
I think the genetic factors that kind of cause that. Well, it's really cool. There's this clock gene. It's actually just called clock. Don't know the long name, but clock. You got like the BMAL1 gene, and there's like the purr and cry genes, and all of these kind of use these genetic feedback loops that regulate your sleep wake cycle. And so there are some variants there, a lot of variants there actually that could influence that for sure. Um, but yeah, there's, when it comes to optimizing health in the hypothalamus, a lot of that can be traced back to leptin resistance. It can be traced back to chronic stress from, so this is actually very interesting. We
Cortisol
talked
level.
about, yeah, that cortisol level. And oftentimes we have problems with continuous high cortisol levels that keep us in this flight or flight response mode.
It's
Keep
like
us,
the same problems
yeah.
that arise from
Mm-hmm.
a constant adrenaline or dopamine.
Yeah,
Like
that's what happens actually is that this continuous high cortisol creates higher levels of adrenaline and norepinephrine. And so this can be why you're in this constant state of anxiety, and that can be a really big problem. But something that they noticed from doing functional MRIs was that simple meditation practices can actually increase the connectivity between the hippocampus that actually regulates the amount of cortisol that is released. And so if your hippocampus is working properly, what happens is that it regulates the amount of cortisol that can be released. And so if this is in not the optimal state, what can happen is that it can allow for these rapid spikes, especially if that's what it's used to, is this living in this constant fight or flight type of experience that is often fairly normal for a lot of people, And I've definitely had moments in my life where I felt like I'm always in a fight or flight mode.
I feel like that's a problem that we deal with a lot in today's society because of the
Oh my
way
goodness.
how
Yeah.
difficult just your day-to-day life is, with people go to 9 to 5, jobs, or even some people work like 2 jobs,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
barely making enough money to get by. They're always worried about bills. Like they've got these constant stressors on their life, with no time to really have that yang to the yin.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, those adrenaline levels, those cortisol levels, get raised over a long period of time. That starts really degrading certain
Yes.
functions and then affecting maybe the hypothalamus. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of that is um can be helped through meditation and mindfulness
that's
practices.
actually a really good point that I want to make sure we hit on directly, is that one of the biggest things you could probably do for your hypothalamus is make sure that you give it the yang.
Mm-hmm.
That it can't, if you're having issues, you suspect it, they stem from hypothalamic, or you're seeing the outcroppings of that.
Yeah.
Look at your stress levels, see what ratio that is of, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know raised intense stress levels. Sleep, you can count sleep as part of your non-stress part, of your
Yeah.
day if you
Yeah.
want to.
Mm-hmm.
um but that's only what 6, 7 hours, 8 hours maybe of your 24-hour period. Look how much of that rest of that period is stressed
Mm-hmm.
period, and then try and rectify that ratio of stress to not stress.
Yeah.
And make sure you give yourself time or an activity or something during your day that you can do that is just for you, that feels good, de-stresses you,
Mm-hmm.
and that you just let yourself exist in that
Yes.
for a bit.
Yes.
I'd say that's like, going to doing activities, going to jobs, making money, things like that don't matter if you're dead. So probably make sure that you
And
keep yourself.
hypothalamic dysfunction and inflammation is a major factor when it comes to life degradation and longevity degradation. So when it comes to optimizing even your lifespan, this type of lifestyle is so vital. Actually, there was a recent study that was done, I think, by Oxford that showed that daytime naps, can increase life expectancy by up to 6 years.
Well, I should be good then. I take an 8-hour
Oh,
daytime
yeah.
nap.
Dude, your life expectancy is just through the roof here. But, it kind of just goes to show that your body needs, or especially your brain, and in centers like the hypothalamus, they need that rest and digest kind of optimization in
So
that
what you're saying
parasympathetic
is that
system.
we need to take a cue from Mexico and give ourselves a midday nap.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a really good point because they know that. Same in Japan. There are these intermittent naps and rest times throughout the day because doing that optimizes their workflow and their ability to stay focused on tasks, having those, and same thing for, this is interesting. This is how the hippocampus kind of ties in, is that this rest allows for memories to consolidate and also allows for hippocampus to better understand how to regulate this cortisol, neoadrenaline response. And so that's something to consider, and let's say you're working 8 hours a day, right? And you only have one break, 30 minutes, even 15 minutes, perhaps. Take a 5-minute window out of the time for mindfulness practices, even if it's not like actual meditation. Allowing your body to just sit for a few minutes in this parasympathetic, serotonin inducing, grateful kind of just state of mindfulness about the present allows for this reset that is absolutely vital for you to continue with proper management of your regulatory processes, and making sure that hormones are in balance, making sure that your cortisol isn't too high. All of this can be done through these types of practices. And if we want, we can kind of actually talk about supporting the hypothalamic health, just to kind of like end it.
Yeah,
on that.
like some of the stuff that we can do to
Mm-hmm.
maybe kind of help either avoid or help it on its way to resolving.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the big things the hypothalamus does is thermoregulation. The preoptic area maintains around 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is with very little error. It is pretty exact, though it varies based on genetics, that thing, but that's kind of the average. And cold exposure is huge for helping optimize this thermoregulatory process, which is a big component in energy balance in the hypothalamus and has a very large cascading effect. And doing like cold plunges and going from really hot to really cold, this type of stuff is huge when it comes, especially for creating new mitochondria and brown fat cells.
It's almost like it adjusts to attempts to adjust towards to expected environments.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not experiencing temperatures that are wildly different,
Yeah.
then it will like almost limit the amount of resources
Mm-hmm.
that it spends towards
Exactly.
towards that regulatory
Mm-hmm.
kind of element of it. So by like exposing yourself to extremes, you're almost like resetting that.
Exactly. And it's giving it the stimulus needed to form the correct connections to make sure that control center has enough cortical real estate to, or just, neuronal real estate to have the full optimization of that process. Because, we say like there are these specific nuclei, but those are just kind of terms that are used for
Say that?
ease of use, or like these nuclei that have these specialized functions. This is kind of where they overlap. Hear me out. They overlap, and if they aren't being stimulated enough, oftentimes more if more relevant environmental stimuli are going to kind of slightly kind of seep into that area if it's not really being used. It's like, oh, well, I'm gonna take some of this resource, take these resources from this specific area that I'm right next to because it's not being used. So this is kind of that kind of fight that's happening. And so, this is stimuli that helps maintain that system really helps with that. But when it comes so yeah, potentially. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I just was confused by the wording earlier, but
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What? So vitamins. There's some vitamins that can play a pretty big role here. Vitamin B1, which plays the role of controlling satiety, so your feeling of satisfaction. So without B1, you won't actually be satisfied with your food. And so this can kind of lead to that leptin resistance if you don't have enough B1 in your system, and which is essential for understanding how much food you need, how much fat you're storing. And then B12, this is for regulating mood and also like fatigue and energy levels that are maintained by your hypothalamus, and can actually potentially lower depression symptoms. And then vitamin C, and this helps with just anxiety reduction, sleep regulation, and then as well as immunity protection, which helps a lot with hypothalamic inflammation.
So switching focus to inflammation, we've got what, like ashwagandha,
Mm-hmm.
that has been shown to be able to decrease neuroinflammation, as well as
Yeah.
kind of provides a lot of
Mm-hmm.
regulatory,
Yeah, reducing stress, that stuff.
lowering cortisol levels.
Same with Rhodolia rosea, that as well. And then what I was talking about earlier, that sounded like a Star Wars language, the ginkgo
yeah.
ginkgo biloba, that have neuroprotective effects that kind of are specific for the hypothalamic glands that are used for hormone production.
What's interesting about that, no matter how many times I read that word, when I first said it when I was younger, I didn't read it all the way through. Relatively younger, I didn't read the word all the way through, and so I started saying it Diablo.
Diablo.
Yes, Diablo. And so I was saying Ginkgo Diablo.
Ginkgo Diablo.
So no matter how many times I read that word and then think about the right way to say it,
it's just
it
what
still comes out as Diablo. Like,
that's funny. That's great. And then the next one, Bacopa monnieri, which is an adaptogenic herb. So it's an adaptogen and a herb that also has neuroprotective effects. And then for like stress and then hypothalamic glands. So kind of that similar. And so maybe if ginkgo doesn't work the best for you, maybe you can try Bacopa. That might help as well. And then there's this supplement also called Vtex as well, that specifically for the women who are watching, it can help balance female hormones, and those hormones.
Sounds like a name brand of something.
Vtex. It's from the chaste tree berry, so it's pretty out there. And then there's some essential oils. Shout out Young Living. You got like frankincense and myrrh that contain terpenes, and as well as a couple other things that help increase oxygen around the receptor sites near the hypothalamus, which is cool. Yeah.
They know that.
They I can go to the study you want me to.
Well, send that to me later if you find
Yeah.
find it like the
Yeah, I got it right here. Yeah, it's just article by Ann Price, Dr. Ann Price. Yeah, which is cool. But do your own research, and then you also mentioned like polyphenols, that as well. Specifically, reduce oxidative stress and inflammation in the hypothalamus. Yeah. Yeah, improving leptin signaling too. Also mitochondrial biogenesis, so creating new mitochondria in cells, aids in that process as
which is
well.
important because those are what we need for energy.
Slightly, yeah.
And
And
so
then
what about like hormone regulation?
hormone regulation. Um, hormone regulation.
I feel like a lot of what people as they get older, and especially as they deal with long-term stress and that just degrades their overall function. One of the first things that we see go is I was going to say one of the first things that we see go or start going is our growth hormone.
Mm, mm.
And there's been numerous studies that have shown that optimal growth hormone levels have very far-ranging implications for your body, like everything from improved sleep quality to improved energy levels throughout the
Yeah.
day to increased ability for your body to repair itself, to increase muscle mass, decreased fat. Like, just it overall seems like it almost is one of those things that helps the body re-optimize itself and rejuvenate itself.
Yes. So
And so as we get older and those levels decrease and our ability to rejuvenate our body decreases along with it, it's almost like one of those things that can't be, it's difficult for it to self-correct itself, because it's like if your ability to correct yourself, to correct issues is decreasing, how do you correct your ability to correct yourself if
Yeah.
that correction of ability is decreasing,
Oh no, yeah, for sure. And a lot of that has to do with, as we get older, we're less likely to procreate, the need for growth hormone from an evolutionary perspective just simply is just not needed, because the life expectancy of an adult was probably around 30 to 40 anyways, and so there's kind of this degradation.
Accept your evolutionary life,
And we shouldn't accept that, but sadly our biology has, and it's currently in this kind of weird process of trying to forego that, because of just over time it's understanding, oh, we're actually living to 80, living to 100, maybe even soon to get past that. And so we need to find ways, since we're kind of the apex species currently, we have ways of defending ourselves that require far less of our own energy. We can actually put all of our we can use our entropy resistant mechanisms to fully focus on longevity and lifespan. And you can kind of see that in like different whales that live to 200 to 300, because nobody attacks them. They're the apex species of their area. And so they start living to 300 to 400, same with certain types of sharks, And so there really isn't, from a biological perspective, a reason for us to die, for this loss of genetic information that then starts to affect other parts, just our systems, and then they start to slowly.
There are reasons why we die, but there isn't a reason for us
to die. Yes, exactly. But when it comes to growth hormone specifically, I mean, there are obviously, you can take growth hormone, and there are many ways to do that. But there's also just where growth hormone is produced,
There's an interesting research chemical we should cover at some point on the podcast. That's the only oral form of growth hormone. That is actually kind of sets itself apart from other oral peptides or like approaches. Actually, I don't even know if the peptides were oral. I think they might have been subcutaneous. But the it sets itself apart also in that it is it stimulates the body's own like production and release of hormone.
Yeah.
And a lot of those, it does it through
Mm-hmm.
a specific mechanism, but like it it stimulates a lot of the processes that we would want to re-stimulate as we get older.
That helps with the production of growth hormone.
Right.
You're
It
saying?
helps your
Oh,
body,
interesting.
your body start producing and releasing like growth hormone, and then that obviously has a whole lot of outcropping
Mhm.
effects.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And it's currently still in the research phase, but it is something that
Yeah.
has been banned by the
Yeah.
sports
Mm-hmm.
the professional sports competition industries, which lets you know that there is pretty significant, it has significant enough results to warrant being considered a performance enhancer
Yeah.
in that regard.
I mean, it has a lot of key functions. Like in early adolescence, it's primarily used for like skeletal growth and as well as like cell division, things of that nature. And then throughout your entire life, yeah, growth hormone specifically does that, and then growth hormone also like regulates metabolic health throughout your life. And so obviously the loss of growth hormone when you get older is going to have some pretty bad cascading effects when it comes to
I.e.,
how
we
you
wonder why
metabolize. Yeah.
we start gaining weight as we get older. We start, losing body composition. Things start
Harder to gain
falling.
muscle.
Yeah,
Yeah, falling apart.
and like that's can a lot of that cascade
Mm-hmm.
can be traced back to growth hormone.
And as well, I mean, and also growth hormone is vital for like tissue repair as well. And so if there's like lots of tissue loss, there has to be extra energy expenditure that is focused on healing that tissue. And that is going to take away from other processes that need that energy. And so growth hormone is pretty big in that. I mean, if you're like 18, 19, or like even if you're like 30 and you're in pretty decent health, there's no reason to really take growth hormone unless there's an actual deficiency, which you can actually know if you have a
I think
deficiency.
the actual number is that usually somewhere around 25 to 30, the starts falling off. So
Yeah.
at that age, there would be potentially a reason for it.
Mhm.
But before that point,
Yeah.
if you're not experiencing any sort of, evidence that would suggest that your hormone levels are falling off, then
Yeah,
there's really
exactly.
not a reason to screw with that at that point.
Mm-hmm. Like the best thing to do if you're young is to optimize the areas in your body and in your brain that produce
Yeah, spend
growth
time
hormone.
focusing on
Yeah.
the other stuff that you
Mhm.
can better optimize while your growth
Yeah.
hormone levels are optimal.
So like, let's say if you're a mother, for example, I don't have the research. I haven't done my research into how you could help, but there are ways,
I am a mother, so
The-
this is particularly relevant to me.
particularly relevant. Before you have your child, your placenta
Mm-hmm.
is what creates growth hormone for the baby. And so there are ways to optimize that as well to give your kid kind of that early stage just optimization. And then your mammillary glands, right? Your gastrointestinal tract also produces growth hormone. And then mainly, though these are all kind of like secondary growth hormone production centers, the main center is the pituitary gland. And so hypothalamic regulation actually, or optimization, can really help when it comes to producing growth hormone in the pituitary gland because of their close connection. I mean, they're right next to each other there, you know? And so I wish I did my research before on the best ways to optimize this health, but just things like having the correct all the vitamins, the adaptogens, everything you can kind of take and put into your lifestyle, physical health, physical fitness that can also reduce inflammation. stimulate neurogenesis, hippocampal regulation of stress, different things of that nature are what's going to allow for the best things to manifest, because you can even see people who even just first start working out at 80 years old, who are slow, they can't really move, they're depressed, they don't feel happy. They start to have physical exercise, they start to gain nutrients. And even if it's in the later stages of life, there are ways to completely transform your experience through this,
Mm-hmm.
through different ways of taking what you know and what you can do and using it. So yeah, that's kind of the hypothalamus, if you will.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, feels like it could
It could be talked about forever.
be talked about for like the next 3 podcasts.
Oh yeah, and that everything is just the overview of everything, not the actual everything. So it's it's insane.
All right. Well, we are going to take a break here for a couple minutes, and then hopefully we'll be back with the LSTM cells.
Oh yeah.
All right, guys. We have decided that we are going to go ahead, since it's kind of late for
Mhm.
us. It's about 12:15. We are going to call it there for tonight, and we will. I know this is the third time that I've done it, but we will move LSTM cells, that conversation, and explainer. We will move to Friday,
Friday.
and we'll have a free flow conversation after that. But we'll start it off with covering the inner workings of LSTM cells
Yes.
in more detail,
Mm-hmm.
and really, didn't intend to go that long on the hypothalamus today, but it was a really important region.
Yeah.
A lot of good information.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not, unhappy that we did.
And the thing about
Um,
LSTM cells is that there's a lot of
Yeah.
really good information.
Yeah. So
About
we
it.
kind of want to have
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
enough time for
Yeah.
that. Not
It's definitely not something we should rush
yeah.
at all.
I agree. So this exciting thing is you guys get 2 podcasts in 1 week.
Oh yeah.
Because we are doing it on Friday, and we're going to be trying to transition probably to Fridays for a time being because it's a little more convenient for us.
Mhm.
And so we this week probably sometime around the evening
Yeah,
in
8
general.
Probably around 8:30.
Yeah, we'll try to get
started.
started. We usually try to get started earlier, but we will try and get it going somewhere around 8 o'clock at the latest. But yeah, so thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate it. Be sure to join us again on Friday for
Mhm.
another fascinating episode. Unleash your inner curiosity. And as always, let yourself get carried away on Theta Waves. Thanks for joining us.
See you guys.